Hello there and welcome to our second video on the topic of transport in plants. Now, we've just learned about the xylem and the phloem, where they are found in the stem and the roots. And we know that the function of the xylem is to transport water and mineral salts, and the phloem to transport manufactured food products. But how are they adapted for their functions? How is their structure adapted for their functions? Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at in the rest of this video. So let's start with the xylem. Now, have you ever been to a graveyard before? You know, like where they bury dead people, like a cemetery? Well, I have. You know, back in about 5-6 years ago when I was still young, my church youth group decided to arrange a journey down to the graveyard, and we looked at all the tombstones, and I had to find a person who died in the year that I was born, and it was, wow, an experience. But if you're looking for a graveyard in the plant, then it would be found in the xylem, because the xylem is made up of dead cells that do not have protoplasm. And hopefully you still remember that this protoplasm refers to the nucleus, cell membrane, and cytoplasm. So xylem cells do not have nuclei, they do not have cytoplasm, they do not have cell membranes. And why is this the case? Right, as a result of being made up of dead cells, xylem vessels have a continuous, hollow lumen with no end walls. So take a look at the diagram here on the right. What you see is actually many xylem cells. Okay, so for example, this is one xylem cell here. Alright, this is another xylem cell here. This is another xylem cell here. Right, and each one of them is dead. Right, they do not have protoplasm. Now, when you stack up the xylem cells onto each other, you form a xylem vessel. Okay, so xylem vessels are made up of xylem cells which are joined together. So the xylem vessel itself has a continuous hollow lumen. Here it's pointing in the middle. It's just a hollow, it's like a hollow tube, right? Hollow lumen. Lumen means the center of the vessel. It's hollow. And there are no end walls. Okay, there are no kind of walls between the cells. There are no walls between the cells. So the reason for this is it allows water to be transported with minimum resistance. Okay, water can just flow through freely with very little resistance. It's a bit like this, okay? If you had a pipe and if it was all clogged up with, you know, dirt and hair and whatever other things you want to think about that could be found in your sewage pipes, if your pipe was clogged up, then the water can't really move through. There'll be a lot of resistance. But because the pipe is hollow, a hollow pipe would allow for water to flow through very easily with minimum resistance. So the xylem is a bit like that. The xylem has a continuous hollow lumen so that water can be transported with minimum resistance. Now, the other thing about xylem is that the inner walls are strengthened by lignin deposits. So these are the cell walls of the xylem, okay? Xylem cells are dead cells. They only have their cell wall remaining. And their cell walls are strengthened by lignin. Now, the reason why is that this provides mechanical support for the plant. Lignin makes the vessels, the xylem vessels, stronger. And this prevents the collapse of the xylem vessel. So lignin helps the vessel to stay in shape even as it transports water up the vessel. I wonder if when you were young, you ever made one of these things before. You know, take some straws and then you connect the straws together to form a very long straw. And then have you ever tried drinking water through that very long straw? You will realize that it is very difficult. Right? And not only that, you realize that this long straw is very floppy and not very stable. Right? It's not very strong. So that is the reason why when you have a very long xylem vessel, you need to provide it with more strength, and it is lignin which strengthens the xylem vessels. and provide support for the plant. Alright? So xylem vessels also come in different types. Alright, there's xylem vessels where the lignin is arranged and deposited in rings. There's xylem vessels where the lignin is deposited in spirals. There's xylem vessels where the lignin is deposited in this way such that you will see little pits that are not lignified. Alright, so lignin can be deposited in different ways. That's just an extension, extra knowledge for you. And there are also different types of xylem vessels. Okay, there are xylem vessels which are made up of vessel elements, which look a bit more like these tubes. And then there's some which are made up of tracheids, which look a bit more like these slim, long-shaped cells. Alright, so just an extra knowledge that there are different types of xylem vessels. Okay, but in general, they do look like this. Right, they're made out of dead cells. There's a hollow lumen. Alright, and there's no end walls, and the cell walls are strengthened with lignin. Alright, let's move on now to the phloem. What is the structure of the phloem, and how is it adapted for its function? Now, firstly, I want you to look at this diagram of the phloem, and you can see that it's made out of two different types of cells. There's this cell here, and there's this cell that's next to it. Alright, so let's focus on this cell first. This rectangle shaped cell. Okay, this cell is called a sieve tube cell. Alright, now this sieve tube cell, if we connect many sieve tube cells together, let's say there's one here on top and one here at the bottom, okay, what you will form is a sieve tube. Okay, so phloem, inside the phloem you will find sieve tubes made out of sieve tube cells. Now, inside these sieve tubes, there are little walls, right? And these walls between sieve tube cells, we call them sieve plates. Alright, these are the sieve plates that separate sieve tube cells from each other. Okay, realize that there are little pores, little holes in the sieve plates. Okay, now finally, this cell here, the one that's next to the sieve tube cell, is called the companion cell. Alright, so phloem vessels are made out of sieve tube cells connected to form sieve tubes and companion cells. Got it? Let's move on then. Alright, so here's the diagram again. You can see the sieve tube cell, the sieve tube, the companion cells, the sieve plate, and you'll realize that sieve tube cells have this very thin layer of cytoplasm. So as mentioned, phloem is made out of sieve tube cells and companion cells. Right, the sieve tube cells join together to form a column called sieve tubes, and these sieve tubes are separated, okay, by walls which have little pores in them called sieve plates. Okay, so that's the basic structure of the phloem. Now let's see how it helps the phloem carry out its function. Okay, focus first on the sieve tube cells. Now you will realize that the sieve tube cells only have a thin layer of cytoplasm, and they lack many organelles. Okay, they just have this very thin layer of cytoplasm. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have a vacuole in the middle. Right, they're very different from normal plant cells. And the reason for this is the holes in the sieve plates and the lack of organelles, okay, they allow for the rapid transport of food substances. Okay, so again, it's similar to the xylem. The lack of organelles, okay, provides a space so that food substances can be rapidly transported with minimum resistance. However, there is a problem for the sieve tube cell, and the problem is, how can it survive? I mean, it is still alive. It's important to note that the sieve tube cell is alive. It is not like the xylem. The xylem cell is dead. Okay, but in the phloem, the sieve tube cells are alive. So how can it survive if it doesn't have a nucleus and if it doesn't have so many organelles? Now that's where the companion cells come in. Alright, so here are my companion cells. You can see that the companion cells have a very close relationship with the sieve tube cells. Right, the companion cells actually help to provide nutrients for the sieve tube cells. And they have a large number of mitochondria. Okay, that is how they are adapted. The companion cells are adapted for their function because they have a large number of mitochondria. And they have a large number of mitochondria to provide energy for the sieve tube cells. They need to support not only themselves, but also the sieve tube cells. Not only that, the energy is used for loading food substances into the sieve tubes. So the sieve tubes transport food substances, and the first step in that is that we need to load the food into the sieve tubes. And this usually involves active transport, which requires energy. Alright, so the companion cells provide energy for the loading of food substances and provide energy to keep the sieve tube cells alive. So this is a different diagram of my phloem. Again, you can see the sieve tube cell and the companion cell. Right, the sieve tube cell does have some organelles, okay, of its own. It has a few mitochondria, some endoplasmic reticulum, but it doesn't have a nucleus. Okay, the companion cells, on the other hand, they have a larger number of these organelles, and they have a nucleus, so they can actually provide more energy for the sieve tube cells. Alright, let's end off by doing a quick comparison of the structure of the xylem to the structure of the phloem. Think about it for a while, and then I'll talk about it in just a bit. Okay, so firstly, the xylem is made up of really cells that are hollow and dead. While in the phloem, the cells were still alive. Right? Both the sieve tube cells and the companion cells are still living. In the xylem, the cell walls are strengthened with lignin. Right? But in the phloem, the cell walls are not strengthened with lignin. Okay, there are a lot more comparisons to be made, and I want you to think about it. We can discuss it more in class. For example, the xylem has no end walls, right? There are no walls between xylem, but for the phloem, there were sieve plates. Right, and are there any similarities? Well, one that I can think of is that both the xylem and phloem, the xylem vessels are hollow, they lack organelles so that there's minimum resistance. And in the phloem, right, the sieve tube cells also lack a lot of organelles so that there's minimum resistance for transport. Alright, that's all for this lesson really. Go on and work on the worksheet and have some practice with questions on xylem and phloem. I'll see you very soon.